So hello everyone, thank you for coming. It's my pleasure to introduce you, Dr. Rodrigo Leite. I guess I have worked with him for about 7 years now. Actually, I was fortunate to be his master and PhD supervisor. He's an outstanding early career scientist. Dr. Rodrigo is currently a NASA postdoctoral program fellow at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, working in the Biospheric Science Laboratory. His research interests include empirical modeling of vegetation traits and the use of remote sensing for forest management, monitoring, and conservation. His current project involves investigating the effects of fragmentation and disturbance in carbon stock of tropical forests. So thank you very much, Rodrigo, for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sibeli. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for everyone to having me here. And thanks for the introduction. And I hope I'm gonna present a little bit of the results we had in our PhD. Sibeli worked with me. She was my advisor. And I think the audience might be a lot of people that also work with remote sensing, so there might be a little of overlap in the knowledge, but I hope at the end we can add on some of what we did for the tropical savannas in Brazil, and also to give some insights for new discussions. Can you guys hear? Is the audio okay? Okay, I'm gonna share. All right, I'm gonna share my screen. Just a second. Can you see my presentation, my slides? All right. Yeah, so as I said, I'm gonna present these results as part of what we did for characterizing fuels for supporting fire management in the tropical savanna in Brazil. This was part of my PhD. I have a lot of to thank to Sibeli for advising and helping me throughout the whole process, and also for Carlos, which was my advisor as well in the project. And this was also, everything we did was kind of a branch of another project in Brazil for fire management in the Cerrado, which is the Preve Fogo project, with a large team, with a large team, with lots of people that made this project possible. So just to give what I'm gonna present here is a little bit of background on the why we're mapping the vegetation fields in Cerrado, what is the Cerrado and why we're doing that, and I'm gonna jump to the results of what we did for moisture content prediction using leaf spectroscopy and fuel load using LiDAR, and some introduction of the new generation of Earth observation systems that we intend to use in the next steps of the project as well. So the Cerrado is a tropical savanna biome in Brazil. It's the second largest biome in Brazil, behind only to the Amazon, and it takes about 20% of the Brazilian area. It's the most biodiverse savanna, tropical savanna in the world, with more than 10,000 plant species. More than 400 of them are endemic. Cerrado is also now it is now one of the frontiers for agricultural development. So a big history of land use change. So it's a very affected biome as well. It contains a range of vegetation structures that goes from forests to grasslands. So it's not only like really open savannas, but there are also some dense forests and also open grasslands, which make the environment very complex. A picture kind of demonstrating that, how the environment in savanna can change from grassland to forest is all dependent on the water availability and the presence of fire, of course. So yeah, the vegetation there evolved in the presence of fire. So some species are really dependent on fire, and some others might be a little more sensitive. But what happens is like in other fire-prone ecosystems around the world, human intervention have altered the fire regimes. So the main policy there was for a long time was fire suppression, and that became in some places it became a problem due to fuel load accumulation, wood encroachment, and that requires that fire to be managed better, and it has been done in the last few decades. But the thing is that human intervention have altered a lot of that, so it's still needing more management in several areas. Here are some examples of the some flowers that comes right after the fire. So fire is important for those species. Here's just another example from the field. Some trees have these really flammable resins that in a foresting fire that can make the fire spread a lot faster. Yeah, so that's why we need to manage fires there in Cerrado in Brazil. And one of the main ways has been by managing fuels, which is in this framework for fire danger and fire propagation and fire risk. So there be lots of differences in the severity of the fire depending on when it occurs, how the vegetation is when it occurs. And yeah, so let's just point out that we need to manage fuels there and to planning, prescribe the burns, model fire behavior, and map fire risk. Some of the characteristics we're interested in are fuel load, fuel moisture content, the rate of dead and live vegetation, the continuity of this fuel, and also the traits diversity. As I showed in that last video of some species may help the fire to spread faster, some others may be kind of a block for the fire. So that's another thing that is important to map. And remote sensing, as our scientists were studying, comes for bringing these local measurements to a higher scale, to region and to landscape management. That's why we need in Cerrado for the given that is a big area. So jump to the first part of the project. Was our objective was to get the fuel moisture content, and especially here using spectroscopy. So fuel moisture is one of the characteristics that we are very interested in for mapping fuels. And we know that some passive remote sensors, some other people might be used to this image here of the reflectance of vegetation, this pattern of reflectance. And there are some clear water absorption features. So that makes passive sensors a great sensor to try to retrieve that fuel moisture. So, but we also know that these spectral responses they can vary depending on several characteristics, which comes from leaf morphology and leaf structure. So we have even like spectral signatures for different species. So, and Cerrado is a biome which has lots of biodiversity, which can make it a little difficult to get directly this fuel moisture. So that's what we wanted to get. So as our main objective was to estimating moisture content from vegetation fuels and using spectroscopy in this case. So we got to the field to get some samples and using the field spectroradiometer and use machine learning models to obtain that. I'm gonna go a little in detail of each of some of the steps and bring the results we had. It's mainly the methods were basically divided in three parts, where we went to the field, collected foliar samples from trees, from shrubs, and also from herbaceous fuels. And with a spectroradiometer, we measured the spectral response of all these samples, came and calculated vegetation index to summarize these samples, input that into a random forest and other machine learning algorithms to predict fuel moisture for all these vegetation layers and all these species. And in the results, we summarize that for several classes of fuel moisture content, just to observe what patterns it shows. Just where we did our field samples spread over the Cerrado biome with some specific sites, which are conservation units of Cerrado, covering all the forest vegetation types, which is forests, savannas, and grasslands. Here, just to kind of show some hoops we needed to jump through doing data collection, also to value the team that worked in the field, which was very helpful team. When we didn't have the climber to get all those height samples, yeah, just to value this team that was a really, they put really a big effort on collecting these data sets for all these projects in Prairie Fogo. And we used that field spectroradiometers to collect the spectral responses. Just a little bit more of the field data collection. Yeah, and yeah, so what we collected was surface, ladder, and canopy fuels. The canopy were basically the trees with DBH greater than 10 centimeters, small tree. For the ladder fuels, we collect that fuel that is between the surface and canopy. We collected small trees and shrubs with DBH greater than 10 centimeters and herbaceous species for the surface fuels. And for all that, we collected leaf samples that we used to collect the spectral response. So just some examples of the field data we collected. And jumping now to the results, here's just to show kind of the distribution of the fuel moisture content that we collected in our samples. We collected over 500 samples, over 300 from canopy, from trees, and around 100 for some of the ladder fuels, and around 72 for surface fuels. We had less plots in grasslands. That's why a little lower number here. But we tried to cover everything that was representative for upscaling that analysis at later stages of the project. So everything that was representative of the sample plots, we tried to collect. And to bring that into the results, to make it easier to show, we've broken down the fuel moisture into classes. With the lower classes, drier classes are in red, in leaves that were with higher moisture content are in blue, dark blue. So just to kind of show the spectral behavior of in the different fuel moisture classes, we see here in this part that's really sensitive to water, this is expected higher absorbance of leaves with higher moisture content. This is not as clear here in this other part that is also really affected by water. Is you can kind of see that the higher fuel moisture content are in blue have higher absorbance or lower reflectance, except for the higher class in dark blue. But this also seems that there is a lot going on here at the near infrared, which make kind of difficult. And there is a lot of influence of other factors other than water that can be affecting here. Spreading out these results by the different fuel classes, we can kind of also see this, the kind of the results gets a little more clear, which might be telling us that the closer the characteristics are between the samples we're having, it can be more clear in the spectral signature, the complete spectral signature. But it's still a lot of going on here at the near infrared region, and especially for the surface, we had drier vegetation for surface. Surface, ladder, and canopy, they have completely different dynamics. Surface here was we collected the data sets in a drier season, and the surface was the fuel part, the fuel class here that was drier than the others. Now bringing into the vegetation indices, it kind of becomes more clear the behavior of these classes and the fuel moisture classes. First, for the water-related indices, where we see this increasing pattern and kind of short interquartile ranges, which shows less variability, except for the yellow class here, which is the middle class. We see there's kind of more outliers too, but it's easier kind of to see than with the complete spectra, the patterns for drier and wetter fuel classes. For the pigments, it was kind of you can see that there are more kind of bigger interquartile ranges. So pigments kind of didn't tell much, especially when using the visible part of the spectra. You see that there's no much clear pattern as well. But when we go like to other components, more specific components, as for lignin and some stress indices, as the PRI, which kind of show the carotenoids too, it kind of becomes more clear, the patterns as well, which kind of sort of brings the shortwave infrared and near infrared bands to calculate them. So it kind of helps more on obtaining these patterns. Going to the model performances, we tested artificial neural networks, random forest, and support vector machines to predict the fuel load. The fuel moisture. And the best models we obtained was with support vector machine, with which a performance of around 11% in our MSE. And it ranged a little bit, but for now on, I'm gonna show just the results for the support vector machine, which was overall the best model that we had. Surface and ladder fuels, the RMSE reached around 15-20% for surface, 10% for ladder fuels, and canopy and total meaning that we did not separate for the other fuel classes, around 12-14%. So overall, was around 15% the RMSE that we obtained to predict fuel moisture content in this range of species in Cerrado. The best predictors showing here for surface, and for the other fuel classes were a bit different. Here in the case of surface, which was the drier vegetation, we have a carotenoid, and which index, which is kind of more related to the drier vegetation and to the dry matter of the vegetation instead of the water indexes. For ladder fuels, also was different. The most important indices, canopy fuels, now we have the NDLI and some showing the more of the water specific indexes as WBI and NDWI. But the thing here is that most of the indices we used are taking the near infrared and shortwave infrared part of the spectra. For predicting fuel load for all the fuel classes, we see that more of what I showed in the vegetation indices box plot. Some indices related directly to water, some indices related to the other biochemical components such as lignin. And most of the indices using the near infrared and the shortwave infrared of the spectra, and both related to water and to these other biochemicals. So not just water. We know that when vegetation gets drier, there are a lot of other physiological processes that happen, such as reduction in photosynthesis and pigment degradation. So that added to the less water that is in the leaves, and these other things that happens when plants get drier can be captured with these spectral indices, and all them help in modeling the fuel moisture content. So this is more bringing us to some of the conclusions, which moisture of different fuel layers in Cerrado can be estimated with the spectroscopy with a RMC of around 15%. The vegetation indices were a good way to summarize that. Some of the things that were not as clear in the spectral responses and the spectral signatures of the fuel and the fuel moisture content classes was summarized well with the indices, especially using the near infrared and shortwave infrared. And the indices were related both to water and to the dry matter, especially when the water is reducing in the leaves. Some other things become more clear, such as the lignin and cellulose. And so these indices brought also explanation power to the models. For the next steps of this part of the project, we want to evaluate other sources of variation affecting the estimates, and also relate all that to our aerial and orbital sensors we have collected in the field data. The field sites. We have a UAV that collected hyperspectral. It had a hyperspectral sensor, so it also collected images with all those ranges of the spectrum. Yeah, so this is gonna come hopefully next for this project. Yeah, so this was what we did for trying to estimate the fuel moisture in the field sites. And the next part was to estimate the fuel load using spaceborne LiDAR. We wanted to use spaceborne LiDARs since Cerrado is a huge biome and required that we have large-scale assessment of the fuels. And LiDAR has been one of the most used sensors to obtain biomass, which is related to the fuel load. So yeah, fuel load is within those characteristics we're interested in. on mapping vegetation fuels. LiDAR has been one of the main tools to obtain that, since it has this capacity to penetrate even in dense forests, and describe very well the vegetation structure. And JEDI was launched in 2018, with some data becoming available in 2019, and is the first spaceborne sensor designed for mapping vegetation, and is almost global. And we wanted to use that to map fuel load in the different layers of Cerrado vegetation. So it was the first spaceborne LiDAR designed for Earth vegetation, and we wanted to use that. So this brings to our objective of assessing the potential of JEDI, the spaceborne LiDAR sensor, to predict fuel load in different Cerrado vegetation layers. So we use JEDI data, collect field data of the fuel load, and use random forests and apply this model to the entire data set over Cerrado to obtain our fuel load estimates. So the methods are also can be split into three parts, three main parts, where we went to the field, collected, we surveyed the area with a UAV LiDAR sensor. From the point clouds you obtain, we simulated a JEDI waveform. We also collected field data for different vegetation layers, including surface fuels, herbaceous fuels, ladder fuels, and canopy fuels. We input that into the model and predicted using the observations from the on-orbit JEDI at the International Space Station. We applied our model to the footprints over Cerrado and assessed this fuel load for the entire biome. So these were the study sites, same study sites from the last part. And basically how the fuel loads were collected, we had 50 sample plots, 30 by 30 meters, where we collected, we measured all trees with dBH greater than 10 centimeters. In smaller plots, we collected all trees and shrubs. We measured all trees and shrubs with dBH lower than 10 centimeters. And in smaller plots of 1 by 1 meter, we collected all the duff, litter, herbs, herbaceous fuels, and wood debris in 5 subplots within our plot. From that, we derived some models, some specific models for surface fuels, a specific model for herbaceous fuels, which are the grasses, forbs, and we created another model by trying to join these two parts, which is the lower stratum of the vegetation. Another model only for the ladder fuels, including the small trees and shrub fuels, which were everything we measured with dBH lower than 10 centimeters, and also for the trees with dBH greater than 10 centimeters. In total, we had 6 models by joining all this. Just to value here also the field data collection, which took a lot of effort from a lot of people and great team working hard. This kind of shows a little bit more of the different vegetation structures we can find in Cerrado as well. Yeah, and then with the field data collection and the UAV LiDAR collection, the point clouds we obtained from the UAV LiDAR, we simulated JEDI waveforms, which is basically transforming these point clouds into a full waveform signal and adding up the expected JEDI noise for that part. That is, the simulation is also part of the current biomass products in JEDI, because it's so hard to get coincident plots and Jedi footprints in both in time and space. We use those waveforms to compute metrics, which are all related to the forest structure, including relative height, plant area index, canopy cover, foliage height diversity, which is basically to describe the complexity of the vegetation. And we put that to a modeling algorithm. We use, in this case, random forest, and to try to predict the fuel load. With the model, we apply that to the Jedi real data set. I mean, with the one that is on orbit at the International Space Station. And we also bring an approach to estimate the uncertainty for each 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer pixel. So we aggregated all the footprint level predictions we had into 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer cells. And within each cell, we came up with this approach to compute the uncertainty, which can vary depending on how homogeneous or heterogeneous our pixel is in terms of vegetation, and how the footprint estimates vary within one another. There were some mathematical assumptions here, but it's basically related to the lack of fit of our model, the uncertainty associated with running the random forest algorithm, which has some stochastic when we run it, and the footprints variability within the cell. So on the results, what we obtained, just to show a little bit of the waveform simulation here, how the differences appear both in the point cloud and the fuel waveforms, especially related to the canopy height and canopy cover, which is near zero in the grasslands. Some of the distributions across also the grasslands, savannas, and forest formations in Cerrado. We can see that the savanna environment falls in between the grassland and the forest, especially here for canopy cover. We try to summarize all these variables too in a principal components analysis, just to kind of show their relationship to one another. Here you can see like kind of the opposite relationship of the canopy heights to the surface fuels, and also how the grasslands are totally associated with the amount of herbaceous fuels, and how the woody fuels are related to the total canopy height. This kind of explains some of the results on the models, because for surface and herbaceous fuels, we kind of did not have we obtained like the lower performances for this, which was kind of expected, since like the energy that of the fuel wave of the full waveform may not be strong enough to capture some of the lower stratum fuels, but it still kind of have some explanatory power for the inverse relationship with the canopy cover and canopy height. For shrubs and trees, we had higher performances, except for the ladder fuels, which we had the poorest performance here. But as expected too, the highest performances were for the biomass and fuel load on trees. Just kind of to show that here too, that the sino is kind of cannot differentiate much on grasslands and when we have only herbaceous fuels, but can capture a lot of the vegetation structure when we have more different layers of fuel load. With the predictions with the predictions in the real Jedi data, the Jedi data that we got from this International Space Station, it's possible to predict and kind of create these estimates and within the footprints. And with that, we predicted fuel load for the entire Cerrado. Here kind of shows the distribution over Cerrado, spotting some areas with higher fuel load, with vegetation with higher density, or another with lower. This scale is a little big to show in more detail, and also the cells is still 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, but it's possible to observe these patterns. We also observed that the difference we had in footprint density in Cerrado, and this have a big impact on the uncertainty and the uncertainty of our predictions, because we expect that when we have more footprints, we will be more certain of what is within that cell. And there was a big range, ranging from almost some pixels with 5, 4, 10 footprints, and others with over 80 footprints. This graph kind of shows this, how the uncertainty, we accounted for that in our certainty model, and that kind of shows how the uncertainty decreases while the number of footprint increases. For the conclusions, we estimated fuel load for the different vegetation layers using JEDI. And JEDI was efficient to depict the vegetation structure for the several formations, for grasslands and savanna and forests. And the models performed better, of course, for the denser vegetation, where we had most of the biomass stored in trees, but were also capable of explaining part of the variability in other fuel components, especially for that opposite relationship between the canopy cover and the canopy height to the surface fuels. For the next step, we need to integrate and these predictions with other sensors to bring up maps with finer spatial resolution that are going to be useful for direct field use and for as input in fire models that need a finer spatial resolution. So that's the next step for the data sensor integration, and also data sensor integration to improve surface fuels that has a completely different dynamics from the other fuels. And I think other sensors might bring up can add power to the models. And also integration of fuel moisture to improve characterization of fire management. We know that the fuel load, as definition, is the vegetation biomass that's available for burning, and the moisture can have a big impact on that, on what is available and what is not available. But the key word here should be for sure integration, because these sensors have really some different characteristics that can contribute differently. The results are in more detail in this publication. And for the last part here, which was also a part of my PhD project, we wanted to summarize some of the new generation of systems that can be used to improve wildfire management. We know that we have these characteristics which we want to obtain, and that has been lots of development in the last decades on Earth observation systems with several types of temporal, spectral, and spatial resolution. we wanted to summarize that, bringing it to the fire management context. So that was the objective, to summarize these sensors. We subsetted the sensors to those that are open data and spatial resolution lower than 10 meters, to allow this mapping at a scale that's usable to managers in the field, and those that were launched within the last 6 years. So we have multiple sensors as multispectral and thermal. We have the Amazonia one, which is developed in Brazil, Landsat 9, which was recently launched into, and EcoStress. Those sensors are really increasing the temporal resolution, especially by integrating with other satellite constellations. The Amazonia one it has characteristics that are very similar to the Sibers constellation that's used to map deforestation in Brazil. Landsat 9, which also has characteristics that are very similar to the Landsat 8, and they have orbits that make the temporal resolution half of which was with Landsat 8 only. And also we have here the hyperspectral sensors, which can help us bring much more spectral resolution to the analysis, as we shown in the first part of the presentation with the fuel moisture content predictions. And here, kind of which part of the spectrum these sensors are covering. So the hyperspectral sensors can allow us to bring much more variables into the predictions, into models we wanted to make, and also to map these several leaf characteristics more specifically. The active sensors, we had JEDI and ISAT2, which are two different types of lidars. So ISAT2 is a photon counting lidar, and the JEDI is a full waveform lidar. And they cover different. ISAT covers some parts of the world that JEDI doesn't cover, and JEDI we know that have a higher capability of mapping vegetation, so they have different characteristics. Coming soon, we have the Biome and ISAR missions that should come soon. So just for final remarks, the data integration from different sensors is what we wanna to focus, because sensors have really different characteristics. We used the spectroradiometers to predict the fuel moisture, and LiDAR to predict the fuel load, and merging all that, we can bring more value into our predictions. And what we want is to bring spatial resolution that allows field management, in a temporal resolution that allows prompt interventions as well. So I think these sensors can help a lot on that. As just wanted to point out again that this was all kind of part of my PhD project. We wanted to bring all this summary of the sensors and some specific cases where we predict two important characteristics, which was fuel moisture and fuel load, used the different sensors, and how they help for this task. This was a branch of this higher project, Previo Fogo, funded by CNPq and CAPES in Brazil. And thanks for the attention. I'm open for any suggestions and for questions. Any part that wasn't very clear, any comment that can add on the discussion for predicting these important variables. This is a still developing project that can be always can be always benefit for any insights that anyone has. Please can reach out to me now, can bring this comment, and can get in touch by mail too. I'm open to any discussions.
Thank you, Rodrigo, for this nice presentation on your work. So I'd like to ask you if someone has any questions, please type.
Yeah, can you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Now I stop. Now I
Okay.
stop.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there you are. I just want to ask you about the size of individual plants. So if I think about the canopy and the ladder and the surface, and those all have, for example, the same biomass. In the canopy, that might be one individual. In the ladder, that might be 10 individuals. And in the surface, that might be 1,000 individual blades of grass. And so you're going to get drying out sort of affected by the size of the individuals. I just wanted to see if you had any comments about sort of the size of the individuals and how much they do or do not dry out based on that.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your question is also more related to the first part where we estimated the fuel moisture, or for everything?
Well, they sort of fit together. In the second part, you said that they roughly had equal biomass. But then, yeah, in the first part, you saw a lot more drying out in the lower layers where things were smaller. So, yeah, I was sort of thinking about the intersection of the two. But yeah, specifically at the beginning where you saw more drying in the lower layers. And maybe that's due to smaller individuals.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. Like the individuals in the lower vegetation stratum, especially like which were in the surface, were pretty much, to estimate the fuel moisture, were pretty much herbaceous fuels, which was kind of even hard a little to get the hyperspectral response because of the size of the leaves. Some was too small to fit into the fuel spectral radiometer. And yeah, I mean, there's, even depending on the size from the ladder and the canopy, that the ladder are smaller individuals for sure, and has less woody biomass than the trees. So for the first part, I think that affects a lot on how these fuels are going to dry out. And because, yeah, I'm not sure if I answer it correctly or too obliquely what you were asking, but the size of the individuals for sure has a big impact on these estimates. But I think that was accounted when we tried to sample over the different sample plots. Can you build a little bit more upon the question, or if I didn't answer it?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess that there's a question of like hood deep as well. So if you are working with like grasslands and shrublands and trees, so mainly for Cerrado, like the trees have in general like very deep hoods. So in the dry season, they keep they keep moisture. And the grasslands in the other way, like they dry very fast. So they have a early senescence. And while some, for example, some trees there, they are like riparian forests, so they never dry. This change, for example, and there is a relationship with size as well. So
Yeah.
it's like life forms and size in terms of structure.
Yeah, thank you.
talk, in your first project, you mentioned something that you use a neural network, which give a root mean square error of about 25%. And then you use an SVM, which give an error of 11%. Why do you think the SVM did better than the neural network? Which neural network did you use? And what is the training and optimization of the neural network?
Have you?
Thanks for the question. And yeah, there might be some reasons for that. One of the first thing, the answer the second questions first. The type of neural network we used was a multi-layer perceptron, but we didn't. Were not really multiple layers. I think were a few layers. So we did not get too deep into the multiple layers of the neural network, which might explain one of the parts. And the support vector machine might have had a better result in this case. I think it might be because this model, it has a kind of a cost function for the outliers. So I guess we had multiple outliers in our data set. It was some hard to get the really sign off the what was going on. And this cost function for outliers might have helped the machine, the support vector machine, to obtain a better result. The other methods, of course, have other approaches to deal with outliers, which can be more or less sensitive. But in this case, I think that might be one of the possible discussions and explanations why the support vector machine had a better result. Yeah, and I think for the neural networks, there is always a step further that we can try to improve it. But we use kind of the most simple structure for a neural network to try to obtain that. We didn't get into the deep learning part of the neural networks in this case. And I think there was one more part of the question. Can you repeat it, please? Or is that covered?
Yeah, what's the training and the hyperparameters, like tuning?
Yeah, the tuning parts of the thing.
Oh, the tuning parts of the. I'll have to answer that to not get any detail wrong. Can I contact you later just to give you? I don't remember the specific tuning parameters that we use to fit for the random forest. I know that we just changed a little bit the number of variables as the number of variables that we choose at each node. For the support vector machine, of course, the cost function, and the neural networks, I think just the number of layers, but I don't have like which ones got the best result in this case. And if you want this, I can, of course, I can just search and send it later if anyone is interested too.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Great. More questions here? Oh, no, in the chat. Open the chat. So, okay, thank you very much, Rodrigo. I appreciate your time here. Yeah, thank you,
Sibel. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Thank everyone for having me here, for the attention. If anyone want any other detail of what was presented, please reach out to me. And any discussion and any suggestion will be very welcome. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.